Hello. I heard someone on the radio say once, spring reminds us we're not inevitably doomed. And I thought, yeah, there's a kind of divine reassurance about the spring. The breath of warmer air after the icy winter blasts is like the breath of the spirit, bringing new life wherever it comes. Everything brims and buzzes with it. And for Lewis, it was an especially important symbol that pops up from time to time, always very significantly. So you find it in his spiritual autobiography, Surprised by Joy. He uses the idea of winter into spring to describe a very specific and sudden moment of change in his life when he was about 12 years old and he was at prep school in Malvern in England. He's already told us in the book how in his early childhood he'd had experiences of a particular kind of joyous longing which would come on him very spontaneously, very piercingly. And much later he believed that this very poignant joy was not an end in itself, but a pointer to Christ. But during what he calls his boyhood, up to the age of about 12, he tells how all of that disappeared from his life. And he had some very troubled years, mainly due to the awful boarding school that he was sent to in Hertfordshire, when his imaginative life, the more intuitive side of his experience, was shut down completely. But then later, when he was at the Malvern Prep School, he wandered into the schoolroom one day and randomly caught sight of a music magazine with an advertisement for Wagner's opera Siegfried and the Twilight of the Gods. And this triggered a sudden, spontaneous flood of all the old joy and the longing. It all came back to him in an instant. And that life-changing, joy-bringing glimpse of the words Siegfried and the Twilight of the Gods, together with an illustration by Arthur Rackham, gave rise to what he called an imaginative renaissance, a rebirth of his imaginative life in his early teens. So in Surprised by Joy, he describes his boyhood as an Arctic winter, which was followed in his early teens by a sudden spring with all its beauty and freshness and life. It's a fairly common archetype, isn't it, that we're all familiar with, really, the green shoots of spring with all their positive, hopeful associations. But for Lewis, there's a twist because it happens with such suddenness. And he says that this long winter broke up in a single moment fairly early in my time at Chartres. Chartres was his nickname for the school. Spring is the inevitable image, but this was not gradual like nature's springs. It was as if the Arctic itself, all the deep layers of secular ice, should change, not in a week nor in an hour, but instantly into a landscape of grass and primroses and orchards in bloom, deafened with bird songs and astir with running water. I can lay my hand on the very moment. I can almost hear the dwarf in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe telling the White Witch, "Your winter's been destroyed, I tell you. This is Aslan's doing." With all the spiritual nuance that has. Our spiritual winter destroyed, and by the breath of the Lion of Judah. And there's a clear parallel between Lewis's experience and the way in which the spring so rapidly ousts the winter in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. They'd been just as surprised as Edmund, it says, when they saw the winter vanishing and the whole wood passing in a few hours or so from January to May. We're told they all knew that it was her spells which had produced the endless winter, and therefore they all knew when this magic spring began that something had gone wrong, and badly wrong, with the witch's schemes. Something has gone wrong and badly wrong with the witch's schemes. More spiritual nuance. The witch's schemes are anti-life, anti-compassion, cruel, tyrannical, anti-freedom, anti-joy. She enslaves, she turns to stone. So what is stone in my life, I ask? Where am I not alive? And all of that is represented by this unnatural, silent winter with no birdsong in the woods and everyone in hiding and in fear under a weight of snow. And Narnia is in an evil enchantment. But then there's a transfiguration with Aslan on the move. There's a very sudden transition to glorious spring and an explosion of colour and life and joy. And you see it first through the eyes of Edmund as the witch tries to force her sledge through the increasing thaw in one of the loveliest passages of the whole Narnia series, I think. And first Edmund feels less cold and the snow is slushier and the sledge not running half as well. And then there was a great leap, even in the traitor Edmund's heart, at the signs of the spring and at all these things to do with colour and light and flower and song. Nature is the mediator of joy. And there comes the lilting music of the babbling streams where there was only ice before. And then there follows the slow emergence of the wonderful living colours of spring from out of that sterile white of the accursed winter. This fresh young larch green, dark green firs, black branches, glowing mists, blue sky, bright celandines and crocuses and primroses and snowdrops. And then the new gold green leaves of the beech trees, so that the light itself is green underneath them. And there are delightful fragrances and delicate new leaves and chattering brooks and the river in flood and the kingfishers and the blue sky. There's all colour, dark green, black, gold, blue, silver, yellow, purple. There's warm sunshine. And then more music, the ringing, piercing calls of the birds. The whole wood was ringing with birds, with birds' music, it says, and the humming of bees. And the witch's silent, colourless winter is destroyed. There's life and movement at every turn. Lives that were held in the grip of winter are now held in the grip of miracle, because Aslan is on the move. And there's page after page of delighted description. "This is no thaw," said the dwarf, suddenly stopping. "This is spring. What are we to do? Your winter has been destroyed, I tell you. This is Aslan's doing." The other children and Mr. and Mrs. Beaver on their journey express their surprised delight in a string of exclamations. "Look, there's a kingfisher. I say, bluebells! What was that lovely smell? Just listen to that thrush." And then after a time, their joy becomes deeper and quieter as they walked on in silence, drinking it all in. Only this time, it's a happy silence, a companionable silence. And the overthrow of winter by spring enacts the delight and the joy of a redeemed world coming into its own. It's just as the prophetic rhyme predicted that Mr. Beaver had quoted. Wrong will be right when Aslan comes in sight. At the sound of his roar, sorrows will be no more. When he bares his teeth, winter meets its death. And when he shakes his mane, we shall have spring again. Wrong will be right. Sorrows will be no more. And in the metaphor, winter meets its death. We shall have spring again. And all because the lion is on the move. And I'm thinking too of the love song, the Song of Solomon in the Bible. Lo, the winter is past. The rain is over and gone. The flowers appear on the earth. The time of singing of birds has come. And the springtime in that poem is a sign above all of love. And in the rhyme, when he shakes his mane, it looks forward to that moment at sunrise at the resurrection, when Aslan, who's had his mane shorn off by the witch, like shearing a lamb, you could say, has grown it back again in all its glory and wildness, and he shakes it on the hill of the stone table at daybreak. There, shining in the sunrise, larger than they had seen him before, shaking his mane, for it had apparently grown again, stood Aslan himself. He's alive, and when he shakes his mane, we shall have spring again. There's an episode in the last battle when Tyrion and Jill and Eustace and their friends are gathered outside the tower in the woods, when the day, which has been sunny, suddenly clouds over and becomes so cold, King Tyrion has to blow on his hands to warm them. And it's because the demon Tash has appeared, floating through the shadows, and even the grass seems to wither beneath him as he goes. And it becomes cold as winter. And then later in the afternoon, by contrast, when Tash is gone, you'll notice it's returned to that warm day of early spring, and the primroses and birdsong and rushing waters, and it all lightens their hearts as they set out on the journey to Stable Hill. And now, under the grace of spring, it says it was hard to think of horrible things like Tash. The springtime holds such goodness, you see, that it lightens our hearts and frees our spirits from the shadow of evil. In his first academic book, The Allegory of Love, Lewis has a chapter on the medieval poet Chaucer, who he calls our supreme poet of happiness. And that sort of Chaucerian poetry, born under a festal Jove, he says is particularly difficult to achieve and rare, but Chaucer was a master of it. And he says it's a poetry of happiness which embodies peace and joy, desires fulfilled, and winter overgone. And there it is, that image, winter overgone, being used to try and convey this rare quality of happiness in Chaucer's work, a blend of peace, joy, longings now satisfied, winter overgone. And finally, in an essay, The Grand Miracle in God in the Dock, Lewis uses the same image of winter into spring to convey the blessings of Christ's resurrection. And he declares that miracles are the first fruits of that cosmic summer which is presently coming on. Christ has risen, and so we shall rise. The resurrection has happened, and everything flows from that. Winter has been dealt a fatal blow. Summer is coming in. And the miracles are the first signs of that. To be sure, he says, it feels wintry still, but often in the very early spring it feels like that. But the transition into spring, albeit a slow one in this case, has begun. And the sight of a crocus in February means spring is on the way. So with the resurrection, we know what's coming on behind. And we have a choice, Lewis says. We can embrace that and live in it, or not. He says we have the power either of withstanding the spring and sinking back into the cosmic winter, or of going on into those high summer pomps in which our leader, the Son of Man, already dwells, and to which he's calling us. It remains with us to follow or not, to die in this winter, or to go on into that spring and that summer. The spell is broken, you see. The curse of our spiritual winter is destroyed. Winter is overgone. And we can, if we choose, go on into the blessedness of the spring. Winter meets its death. We shall have spring again.